going to go over the rest of those ocean floor notes, and we're also going to go over the ocean floor flat books. So pay close attention, take the notes down as I get them down on my paper. You're going to copy them down on your paper. So when you come back to school next week, your notebook should look exactly like my notebook. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so I know this is usually a different setup than what we have now whenever I'm usually teaching on the board, but I really wanted you guys to be able to see my notebook paper and us take the notes down together. So let's go ahead and do this first paragraph. I know we already did it in class, but I just want to make sure that we all have the same stuff down and we're all on the same page here. So first, of course, we are going to start off by highlighting the title. And again, don't judge my fingernails because I have lost 2 of them. But you know what? We're just going to roll with it. I'm going to highlight the title. We are talking about the ocean floor. You guys should know that already. We've been talking about the ocean a little bit here and there. And yes, there is a piece of tape on that. It's where I stick it up on the wall. So there's kind of a little bit of a glare, but it's okay. You can still tell what it says. So we have the oceans of the world cover about blank of the Earth's surface. If you have been listening to me in class you know that the ocean covers about 70% of the entire Earth's surface. And this is over 140 million square miles. And that is just an absolute insane amount to think about. It's just crazy, crazy amount. So it is extremely important to know that first sentence, that the oceans cover about 70% of the Earth's surface. So I'm going to highlight it, or underline it. Oceans of the world cover about 70%. That is really important. And you'll notice that I use underlining, I use highlighting to help me tell the difference between certain words and help me understand a little bit better. So let's move a little forward. The oceans vary in blank. So I talked about this a little bit in class. Some places in the ocean are deep, and some places in the ocean are completely shallow, not very deep at all. So they vary in depth. And you need to know what this word vary means. Now, notice it's spelled V-A-R-Y, not very like I am very tired or very like I am very hungry, but vary means that it changes. So we're going to write that out to the side. Changes. And you also need to know that depth means how deep, or the deepness of the water. How deep. All right, so hopefully you can see that. You'll have to let me know if this setup doesn't work because I've never tried it before. We're just going to go with it. So the oceans vary in depth from the shallow waters of the continental shelf. Remember, I told you that if you were at the beach, you were sitting on the continental shelf. The continental shelf is the land right at the edge of the water, right there where the beach is. Remember, I told you that we sit stuff on the shelf, and when we're at the beach, we do a lot of sitting, so we're sitting on the continental shelf. So they vary in depth from the shallow waters of the continental shelf to the deep, dark waters of the ocean trenches. If you went on a field trip across the ocean floor, what do you think you would see? Remember, we talked about how underneath the ocean water, it is the same land features that you see if you were to look outside. There are underwater mountains, there are underwater volcanoes, there are underwater valleys and trenches and hills. So the layout of the land looks exactly the same, except it's just covered by water. So we can't really see it that well, but it's down there, I promise. So you would see the same landforms that you see on land. Mountains, valleys, hills, and plains. And remember, plains are the really flat part of the earth, like a desert, or out in the Midwest, there's just a bunch of grass and really nothing else. That's a plain. Some important features of the ocean floor include, so this is where we're actually going to list out what the ocean floor layers include. So the continental shelf, the continental slope, the continental rise, the abyssal plain, and trenches. So this last sentence is extremely important. You can kind of tell it because it's bolded. So we need to know in 5th grade all of these specific parts of the ocean floor. So because it is so important, we're going to highlight it. All right, so I've got it highlighted because it is so important. You have to know the continental shelf, you have to know the continental slope, the continental rise, the abyssal plain, and then finally trenches. So let's get into each layer specifically. All right, I'm going to move my notebook up a little bit. So first we have the blank blank. The blank blank is the part of the ocean floor that begins at the, out of these pieces of the ocean floor, the continental shelf, remember I told you, is that very first one, the one right on top of the land, right where we would sit if we were at the beach. So that's the first one we're going to talk about, the continental shelf. And if you need to pause the video to write some things down, that's fine. Because I know sometimes it's hard to copy things down and listen at the same time. So if you need to pause my video, you can. So the continental shelf is the part of the ocean floor that begins at the, let's think, what is another word for beach? I don't want to put beach, but I want to talk about the place where the sand and the water touch each other, right in the middle, and that is called the shore. I'm sure you've heard that word before, the shore. The continental shelf is that part of the ocean floor that begins at the shore and gently slopes underwater to an average depth of 430 feet. So imagine 430 feet. That is extremely, extremely deep. But what's crazy is that the continental shelf is actually the most shallow part of the entire ocean. So that means it's the least deep of the entire ocean, but even the least deep is 430 feet. So just imagine how deep the entire ocean must be if the shallow part is 430 feet deep. That's just crazy for me to think about. So you need to know some important things from this sentence. It is the part of the ocean floor that you need to know begins at the shore, and you need to know that it gently slopes. It says it is covered with thick layers of blank, blank, and blank. It is covered in thick layers. Let's think about what we see at the beach. When you're at the beach or you're in the ocean, you see definitely sand. You could see some mud. And you could see some rocks. It is covered with thick layers of sand, mud, and rocks. When you play in the water at the blank, you are on the continental shelf. Remember, I told you that when you are at the beach, you're on the continental shelf. So I'm going to highlight at the beach. And here in my little space, I'm going to draw a little sunshine. Now this is yellow, so you might not be able to see it, but I'm drawing my sunshine, and I'm gonna draw, let's see here, some water right here, and I'm gonna draw myself a little beach chair, and that way my brain remembers that when I'm sitting in my little beach chair here, I am on the continental shelf. When I'm at the beach, I'm on the continental shelf. All right, so we've talked about the continental shelf, and now we're going to move to the next layer down. So the continental shelf is right here at the edge. The next layer that kind of goes down a little bit is actually called the continental slope. Continental slope. That's the next one. The continental slope begins at the edge of the continental shelf and plunges down to depths of over blank miles. Look, we're not talking in terms of feet anymore. We're talking in terms of miles. That is extremely, extremely, extremely deep. All right, so depths of over 2 miles. We also, let's see, we need to highlight that the continental shelf begins at the edge of the continental, or I said the continental shelf. The continental slope begins at the edge of the continental shelf. We also need to know that it plunges. And we talked about that word plunges earlier. Now, I don't mean plunger like toilet plunger. I mean plunges like a let's see, sharp drop. If you're on a roller coaster and you have made it to the top of the hill, you're going to take a plunge down towards the other side, down towards the ground, because you're taking a sharp drop. You're up top, and then all of a sudden you just go straight down. That is a plunge. So the continental slope plunges down, down, down towards the ocean floor over 2 miles, which is extremely, extremely deep. And this area is also covered with thick layers of, it's the same stuff, sand, mud, and rocks. Sand, mud, and rocks. All right, the next layer of the ocean floor we're going to talk about. So we've done the continental shelf, that's up at the beach. We've done the continental slope, that's when it starts to slant down. Next, we're going to do the continental rise. Let's write that down. Continental rise. The continental rise is a blank sloping area that connects the steep walls of the slope to the bottom. Okay, so this is actually a gentle sloping area. And by gentle sloping, I don't mean straight down. I mean just like a gradual decrease towards the ocean floor. So we've got the continental shelf, which is pretty flat up towards the top. Then we've got the continental slope that is a very steep plunge down towards the bottom, and then it kind of starts to flatten out a little bit again. The continental rise, it starts to flatten back out, not as steep. It's a gentle slope, and it connects the steep walls of the continental slope to the bottom of the blank, the bottom of the ocean floor, because we're making our way down towards the ocean floor. It too is covered with thick layers of same stuff all over the bottom of the ocean floor. Sand, mud, and rocks. Okay, we need to highlight some important stuff. Let's see, continental rise, because that's what we're talking about. It is a gentle slope, and it connects the steep walls of the continental slope to the bottom of the ocean floor. So the continental rise is a gentle sloping area that connects the steep walls of the continental slope to the bottom of the ocean floor. So it's kind of where the land starts to flatten out again a little bit. And it's covered with sand, mud, and rocks, just like the other layers. All right, next down, so we've made it almost to the bottom of the ocean. We've gone through the continental shelf at the beach, the continental slope, the continental rise, and now we're at the bottom of the ocean. So at the very bottom of the ocean is called the abyssal plain. The abyssal plain is the blank area of the ocean floor. So the abyssal plain, think about the Great Plains states out west. They're very, very flat, just like the bottom of the ocean floor. So the abyssal plain is the flat area of the ocean floor. So we're going to highlight that. Abyssal plain is the flat area of the ocean floor. It is covered with sand, mud, and blank. Now, this is not sand, mud, and rocks like the rest of the layers. This is sand, mud, and something else. Think about this. Okay, there's so many things that live in the ocean. And when those things die, either if it's a plant or if it's an animal, when those things die, they usually sink to the bottom. Okay, well, here we're at the bottom of the ocean, so it's kind of gross, I know, but at the very bottom of the ocean, there's a ton of remains that are just laying there and decomposing. All right, so sand, mud, and plant and animal remains. So this layer is a little different than the rest. It is covered with plant and animal remains. And the reason it's covered with remains is because when things die, they sink to the bottom and they just lay there until they decompose. So located on this flat plain are undersea mountains called seamounts. Remember, I told you that undersea mountains, well, look at this. This word sea mountain has sea in it, and it has mount in it from the word mountain. So if you take sea and you add it with the word mount, you get the word seamount, which is a mountain that is underneath the sea. So on the abyssal plain, even though it's very, 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 very flat, occasionally you'll be coming along and there will be a big mountain. Now it's still underwater, okay? You can't see it from out of the water. That would be an island. It's still under the water, but it is a mountain. It's like a hill under the sea. And those seamounts are formed by... Somebody told me, I think it was Azura actually. Azura told me that erupting volcanoes create more land. So these mountains that are under the sea actually are created, let me put an arrow there so I know what I'm talking about, actually are created by volcanoes. So when those volcanoes, oops, I should have written that in pink. When those volcanoes erupt, when those volcanoes erupt, the lava that is coming out cools and hardens and forms a hill, a seamount. Now, if it was out of the water, we would be calling it a mountain. But since it's under the water, under the sea, we call it a seamount. All right, so the last one that we're going to talk about right here is something called trenches. So trenches are very deep and similar to blank on land. Think about it. Trenches are when the abyssal plain is just going along flat and then all of a sudden it's just a sharp drop off. Looks like a V has been cut out in the land. It's a big trench. So they're very similar to canyons. I don't know, maybe you've heard of the Grand Canyon before. That is out west. The Grand Canyon is a big, sharp drop off in the land. It's like a big chunk cut out of the land. Well, there are also trenches, canyons under the water. And when those canyons are under the water, we call them trenches. So trenches are very deep and similar to canyons on land. So we're going to highlight trenches because that is what we were talking about. And we're also going to highlight very deep. Trenches are very deep and similar to canyons on land. The deepest ocean trench on Earth is located in the blank ocean. It is located in the Pacific. We talked about the different oceans. The deepest known trench in the entire world is located in the Pacific Ocean. And it is called you've talked about this a little bit in your independent work. It is called the Marianas Trench or Mariana Trench. Mariana Trench. It is 36,198 feet in depth, which means it's 36,198 feet deep, which is crazy, crazy, crazy deep. That's deeper than any human has been. The Grand Canyon, which I was talking about earlier, the Grand Canyon is the largest canyon on Earth, and it is only 5,300 feet deep. So the Grand Canyon is on Earth, and it's only 5,300 feet deep. Imagine seeing a canyon that was 36,198 feet. That is so that's almost 30,000 more feet. That's a little bit more than 30,000 more feet than just the regular old Grand Canyon, which is completely insane to think about. So you need to know that the deepest trench on Earth that we know of, because remember, the ocean is huge, and there are places in the ocean that we have yet to explore. But the deepest trench that we know of is the Mariana Trench, and it's 36,198 feet deep. And you also, we're going to circle this word right here, trench. And we're actually going to draw a picture of a trench. So I'm going to draw my flat abyssal plain, and then all of a sudden a sharp drop off that looks like a V cut out in the land. This right here, this big hole in the land, is a trench right there. So your notebook, and even if you didn't use the same colors, that's fine, but your notebook should look like mine, with the same places highlighted, the same words and definitions made, and the same pictures drawn, and the same words filled in the blank. All right? So when you come back to school, I will be checking this to make sure that your notebook matches my notebook page. All right? So thank you for listening and following along, and now we are going to move right along with your independent work.